It's the end of the 1990s. ICP signed their proteges who helped create the soundtrack for a collapsing empire on Mostasteless. Now, this episode, we'll talk about this, how this album really reflected a lot of the cultural and political things that defined late 90s hip-hop and American culture in a way that's surprising. We're also going to talk about how while ICP often used similes in their raps, Twiztid would more often rely on metaphors as a lyrical technique because of their origin in battle rapping, and bridging this metaphor of the collapsing empire with their lyrical approach and an extreme aesthetic and topical approach to rapping is what set Twiztid apart from ICP, but is also what kind of limited them in a lot of ways. Welcome to Hatchet Chat. This is episode 17. I'm here with MC Snax. It's the almighty 17. Holler.
That's right. A very special number and a very special album, dude. Twiztid Mostasteless OG release, Juggalo classic.
I didn't know you had the original. Those are like, what, $50 on Discogs?
Yeah, actually, I think that this is a reprint of the original.
So there are a few different versions of this album, and that's become a theme with Psychopathic, like re-releasing things, changing it slightly. The Island re-release has the cool comic book cover, but the visual aesthetic throughout the book is kind of confusing how it really relates to Twiztid. Other than that, it's like cool comic books. Then there's the version that they proposed with the two heads of the fetus with two heads. What's the story behind that, Snax? Do you know what the covers?
No, I do. I think all I found out about it was like it was an alternate cover. I don't know if it was like regionally released in certain areas, if it was on tour or anything like that. That's definitely one of the tidbits that if any Juggalos know, they can let us know for sure in the comments because I'm curious. I
also want to say y'all have been really great with your comments. Like the engagement in the comments are great. So thank you. Keep it coming. That's been like one of the coolest thing, like seeing everyone's feedback, and we love y'all. Thanks for watching Hatchet Chat. Okay, so hip-hop in the late 90s was interesting because this was the first example where underground culture like black metal, grindcore, like hardcore punk, like leftover crack era kind of, that genre of music was starting to have its influence in hip-hop and rap. And I think Twiztid really drew on that like shocking imagery. And let's talk about a little bit of the history. So the Bosnian War had just ended, and the Bosnian War was the result of the USSR pulling out of Eastern Europe post-Cold War, and the Balkans trying to find this peace where different regional ethnic groups were fighting for control of Sarajevo and other places. And so this had an effect in our consciousness because as the empire of the USSR and the US, everything was changing. World War II was further in the background. There are all these issues that were coming up about what happens when you have this legacy of violence. And there is this Canadian band, Snax, I don't know if you heard of them, they're called Inner Thought, and they put out this record during the Bosnian War called Worldly Separation. And on the cover, the reason I'm mentioning it is because like I had this CD as a kid. I was like 12, and it was like the cover so shocking. It was a picture from the Turkish genocide, which is when the Turks had a genocide against Armenian people in 1915. And there's these soldiers standing. We could show it. And there's a basket full of freaking decapitated heads from the Armenian genocide. And this was from, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, there was all this, violence and war within Turkey and Armenia. So that caught my attention. And inside, it was a political album. And there's a quote in there. The guy said, this is for everyone who's been affected by the Bosnian War. We need to bring peace. And it's like, okay, so using violent imagery to show political things has been a staple in grindcore, black metal, punk. And I remember there's a band called 6 Feet Under. They had an album called Haunted. It was a side project from Obituary and Cannibal Corpse, which was like super violent death metal, super gory, shocking, Norwegian metal, Emperor, and all that stuff. Like the mayhem, the fact that band members were killing each other, you know what I mean? Like the violence, and then showing album covers with like this death from Mayhem shot himself in the head, and then they made that the cover of the album. Like, it's crazy, right? The fact that there was this shocking, insane, so to speak, graphic element of black metal and all this stuff that reflected the violence and turmoil of post-World War II collapsing of empire and all the violence in the world got shown to new generation music fans in a way that like you wouldn't see this on you wouldn't see this on like a Beatles record wouldn't have a basket full of heads.
No, even though they had that weird babies cover, they wouldn't go that far.
That's true. Yeah, like there was this shift. So I think that was one of the primary aesthetics with Twiztid. It just resonated with people because it was so shocking. And if you look at the liner notes, they have like the pregnant woman, they have like weird gory stuff. Like it's just, they have the woman with the axe to her throat. Like there's all this gory graphic imagery that isn't in the Island re-release because it's probably too extreme. Like the major labels weren't signing Mayhem and Inner Thought and 6 Feet Under, even though 6 Feet Under was put out by Metal Blade Records, which had like major label distribution. Twiztid tapped into this aesthetic in a way that ICP wasn't quite doing that. And that goes back to the theme of using metaphor as opposed to using a simile, being like, this is directly how we express our feelings by using this imagery, as opposed to relating to it tangentially through the metaphors of the Dark Carnival. So that's kind of what I was thinking about when I listened to this record. Snax, have you seen Fantasia, the Disney anime? Okay.
I have not.
Do you know this? You know this, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the thing where Mickey Mouse puts on the robes. Okay, cool. This is some history. So, it's a great cartoon. Fantasia was this animated classic where Disney took all these classical pieces and animated stories. Like that's a very like hip hop to do. Take stories of the past and retell it in a new way. Not that it had hip hop music, but that ties into that culture. So. There's this sorcerer, this wizard, and Mickey's working for him, cleaning the floors, all this stuff, doing, helping him out. And Mickey realizes that if he can do spells, he can bring the brooms to life, and the brooms will clean the house for him. But suddenly, his power gets out of hand. Mickey gets too proud of his ability to make the brooms come to life. And eventually there's this huge flood and everything goes crazy. And the sorcerer, his boss, has to come in and get all the brooms to stop. But like Mickey's power as the sorcerer's apprentice gets out of hand, and he gets a little drunk with his power and his ability to use the magic that his boss gave to him. And I think about when, there might be a lot of comments about this later, like the whole controversy with Twiztid and ICP and this platform that ICP gave Twiztid. But the fact is that Twiztid were master storytellers, artists who had a aesthetic vision, really great rappers, and they brought something new to Psychopathic, specifically their ability to tap into this aesthetic stuff we were talking about, and all the artists they brought to the label. And even though sometimes the brooms and the magic got out of control, I think we can, when we listen to this record, we can be like, we understand why Twiztid was so important in building Psychopathic. And that's why this record, instead of pointing fingers at who did what, who did this and that, we're talking about the music and the history of Twiztid's involvement in Psychopathic. And we're not, we're only going to review the Psychopathic release, Twiztid Records. Like, shout out to Magic Ninja, because even though, George is tight and I interviewed him on the podcast, I have love and respect for what they're doing. But this is Hatchet Chat. It's not Magic Ninja Chat. No disrespect,
Absolutely. And to your point about like Twiztid, this album just being more gruesome, like, I don't know, I think, you were probably a bit older than me when you first heard it, but I was really new, to that level of darkness in music, besides like, I knew like Marilyn Manson and Korn and stuff. But, I like the Race Shangri-La was the first album I bought, as you know, and then I bought Twiztid Green Book, Psychopathic album, I mean. But then I bought Most Tasteless. And I remember, like, I was 11 or 12, and I remember, like, that feeling of, like, okay, I'm listening to something, like, it did shock me, like, just the overall vibe with the beats, you know what I mean? How some of the lyrics, because I bought the Island re-release, so some of the lyrics were reversed. It just felt like, it did feel shocking. It felt hardcore. And, I don't get that feeling listening to music anymore. But when I think of Most Tasteless, I think of, actually having that feeling of being shocked by music, Yeah,
and even the title, Most Tasteless, it's like, it's like their whole aesthetic was, how are we going to shock? How are we going to be even more shocky than ICP? I mean, proteges through rap, it's been a long-standing tradition. Eazy-E famously brought up their Midwestern homies, Bone Thugs and Harmony. Jay-Z mentored Kanye. You mentioned Marilyn Manson. He was a protege of Trent Reznor's. MC Chris, for years, was a mentor to me. Like, that's a common theme. And so how did this translate? Well, there was the two crazy twins, and Behind the Paint, they talk a lot about the marketing. That was the alternate cover with the fetus with two heads. I remember there was an action figure where they're pulling each other apart Freak Show would really tap into this aesthetic. When I first started dating my wife, she found I had that Twiztid toy, and Monoxide's one of his dreadlocks had fallen off, and I glued it on. And she's like, "You're in your 30s, and you're gluing Twiztid dreadlock toys back on." And we always laugh about that, but like, yeah, I mean, that was fresh. That toy is so dope. I don't know if you remember.
The exact same thing happened to me, brother.
With the gluing the dreadlock on?
I didn't glue it. I kept it. I got it like in a little baggie, but mine fell off too, of Monoxide's head. I think multiple of them did.
Your dreadlocks need to be on. It's funny. You'd think it was the multiple man whose dreadlocks came off. Hey! That's right. I met Madrex on Warped Tour 2 years ago when they played Warped Tour, because, Warped Tour is my jam, man, and I went to hang out with them. And I was struck by this. I don't know if you knew this. So Violent J is 6'2", Shaggy's 6'2", Monoxide is 6'2", and Jamie Madrox is 6'4".
Yeah.
These freaking dudes are tall, and so you think about, it's like these tall Detroit rap guys all find each other. They say tall people have an easier job and they get more attention, but I didn't realize how freaking tall, especially Madrox is, man. That's why he kind of is a little hunched over,
Yeah, and Blaze, I think Blaze might even be like 6'5" or 6'6". I remember every time I see Blaze and Madrox, I'm like, holy smokes.
Insane tall posse.
Big boys, that's right. Yeah, ICP actually talk about that on one of the House Party Peep Show podcasts they did. They talk about how everyone used to think they were sports because they'd roll with entourages, but they'd be really big. So people think they were in some sort of pro sports.
Yeah, I imagine sleeping in a tour bus in a bunk is hard enough. When you're 6'4", yo.
Tell me about it.
In 2011, I signed this dude, Weird Science, who's a drummer for Coheed and Cambria, and he was the only artist I signed to Horus Records. I signed him because I loved how much he sounded like Jimmy Madrox. I don't know if y'all go listen to Friends and Nervous Breakdowns, which is Weird Science's first record. His cadence, his flow, his timbre, it's so much Jimmy Madrox. And Weird Science, I don't think it ever heard Twiztid, but I was like, this dude can freaking rap, because Monoxide has style. Monoxide's like Jay, but Monoxide can rap, but Madrox's flow is just that freaking dude is so talented. I know, man.
And with Twiztid, dude, I remember when Abominations came out, of course, everyone knows that album. They just took it to the next level lyrically, and Monoxide did too. Monoxide says he finally learned how to rap with Abominations, so.
That's funny. It's interesting how their live show was very refined. When I toured with Weird Science, I was like, we need to do this. So they'd always be Jamie would be here, Paul would be here. When they switch, they mirror each other. Every rapper I've worked with, we got to look at Twiztids, especially old stuff, and copy them. They come together, they mirror. ICP do have great dynamic. It's just a little more chaotic, and with the Fago and everything. But Twiztid, if you watch, they're always watching each other and copying where the other person goes. And the other cool thing that I love about them that I've always tried to copy is especially in the olden days, they do something they switch lines. So it'd be I represent the east side, no peace, F the police. They tell me to increase in disease, deceased, whatever. They switch lines. So Jamie does one line, Paul does the next. It's so cool because the fact that they have to, often you just learn your own verse. They learn each other's verses and trade back and forth. And that's something I always tried to do with Megaran, Whitey Cracker, Weird Science. Is when it comes to teamwork and a duo on stage, that struck me when I first saw them on the Clowns from Outer Space tour. I was 16. I was like, yo, this is tight. And you can learn from Twiztid and ICP as a rapper. And that's why it's kind of in a way sad that they're not down with each other anymore, because it was one of the coolest collectives of all time. But we don't have to get into that. What's up with the House of Horrors tour? How did House of Krazees and ICP link up, Snax?
Great question. Basically, Twiztid was originally a part of a Detroit, horror rap group with another rapper that we all know, the ROC, and that group is called the House of Krazees, and they were just, doing their thing regionally in Detroit, and when ICP, put out Malenko and got their own tour, the House of Horrors tour, they actually were looking for people to open up on their tour, and House of Krazees, they brought them along with Myzery. So that's actually how the working relationship started. Even though ICP didn't originally have a positive, experience with House of Krazees, because Violent J mentions in the Behind the Paint how they used to tear down ICP's promotion posters, and they weren't secretive about it at all. But funny enough, they, on that House of Horrors tour, they bonded.
It's funny. Well, they saw that they're out there grinding, right? And that's like a respect. I mean, it's funny. House of Krazees, House of Horrors. There's got to be Halls of Illusions. Noun, preposition, something spooky. Blank, blank, blank. That's like a common theme with horrorcore, and that's cool that the House of Krazees were on the House of Horrors tour. I never made that like linguistic connection till you've said it, but
yeah. Unfortunately, it didn't go too well. I guess the tour was going okay, but House of Krazees was having some internal conflict. And also conflict with their management, and they dropped off of the tour. But that wasn't it, because Jamie and Paul contacted Violent J and said that House of Krazees is no more. They only played one show after dropping off of that tour and broke up, and they called ICP, asking if they could roll with Psychopathic. And ICP originally, some Juggalos might not know this, but I think were in a group with Blaze, your dad homie. And Violent J mentions in Behind the Paint that it was a group called Infamous Superstars Incorporated, which was kind of like a comic book villain gimmick. But Violent J says he wasn't really feeling that gimmick for them at that time, and they worked with Twiztid to give them the name Twiztid.
And also, I mean, the main, that's a great history, Snax. High five, A+. ROC was mad, apparently, because there wasn't enough room for their shirts, and so he came on the bus yelling at them. I've been in situations like opening for bigger bands, like Bowling for Soup and Simple Plan and pop punk bands, where you're playing big 2,000 seat rooms. There's not much room for your shirts, man. You're gonna like have to weasel your way, and plus you don't want to be out at merch all day watching your merch. Like, being an opener can be hard as heck, especially when no one knows who you are and no one really wants you there. So I could see how this would push ROC buttons, because like you're not getting paid a lot to open. So the fact that they couldn't have their shirts up, like, I related to that, but I also feel like you don't go onto the bus and scream at the headliners for not being able to put your shirt up. That's how Jay tells it. It may not be true. ROC would later be on Magic Ninja, and House of Krazees would reunite, right?
Yeah, they would. They put out releases every now and then. I think they just put out some tracks for Halloween. And what's ironic about the whole ROC thing is that originally back then, they had ICP, had some conflict with the ROC, but now they have conflict with Twiztid, unfortunately. But Violent J always speaks highly of the ROC. It was a big deal a couple years back when Violent J tweeted about the ROC, how he's a stand-up dude, and this was like,
that's funny.
When the beef was like pretty high tension. And I think on the House Party Peep show, one episode he also spoke really highly of the ROC. So it's kind of funny how ironic how that kind of flip-flopped.
So let's talk about the liner notes, because this is interesting. So Jamie Madrox gets his name from the Multiple Man, who's an X-Factor hero from the Marvel Universe, a recent addition to the mutant team known as X-Factor. Multiple Man's mutant power makes him a team all of his own, for his body generates duplicates of the original Multiple Man upon impact, because Jamie does different voices, different characters. One of his skills is being able to rap and sing, and he does a lot of the comedy characters on future ICP albums. This makes Multiple Man a formidable opponent. Indeed, for the harder his enemies fight him, the more of him there is to fight. And Jamie Madrox from the X Factor. X Factor is not really a clique that people know about. They're not really representing the MCU. But Jamie Madrox, he's a nerdy dude. He loves comic books. He loves, I remember I Want to Be Batman, like that song from Freak Show. I remember like the Batman Twisted shirt. It's funny how in the liner notes he disses Alicia Silverstone for being Batgirl. And it's kind of like nowadays if someone had dissed Alden Ehrenreich for being Harrison Ford in Solo, right? Like a nerdcore rapper, like, yo, like Ehrenreich, you can't play Solo like Harrison Ford, G. What's up? Like, that's not a very gangster thing to go to diss someone for, but it's funny that he's dissing Alicia Silverstone for trying to be the Batgirl in 97.
100%. Jamie Madrox was kicking that nerdcore flavor. I think one could argue he's probably a pioneer of, the nerdcore flavor.
I mean, he showed me it was kind of fresh to reference superheroes and that stuff, and I was like, it's cool that he didn't care. He'd represent it. And talking about similes and metaphors, like ICP, if they have a love for something, they might talk about it in a connected way. Jamie Madrox names himself the freaking Multiple Man, like Jamie Madrox from Marvel. And when we did the Marvel podcast, Myzery and I was talking to Ryan, who does the podcast. I'm like, yo, Twiztid, right? Like, there was a poster and Multiple Man was on. I'm like, yeah, Jamie Madrox from Twiztid named himself after that character. He's like, oh, did he change his name? I'm like, nope. Jamie Madrox, the Multiple Man. He's like, you mean you didn't change it at all? I'm like, no, it's Jamie Madrox. He's like, all right, well, you got to do what you got to do. I always thought that was funny to talk to one of the head people at Marvel about that, and they didn't even know.
That's a funny story.
They talk about Alex Abyss being the best manager they could have ever had, and I sometimes wonder, had Alex not left, would Twiztid still be on Psychopathic? That's a whole episode. I don't know.
That is a good question, man. It's hard, yeah, that is a good question, dude. I don't know either.
I feel like, yeah, because I feel like a lot of the dissatisfaction was how the income, I don't know. I can't speculate.
Yeah,
I can't
now,
speculate.
Thinking about that a little bit, if we were to speculate, like, because like if we're talking about some of the, beef, I think there was foreshadowing of it in like the early 2000s around the Green Book, because like, it looked like they were going to be starting their own label, and Alex Abyss was, manager then. So it's hard to say how things would have turned out.
But it's cool that, I mean, looking at the liner notes are interesting because in the re-release on Island, you don't see a lot of things. Like Madrox gives a shout out to John Carpenter for creating the only man that scares me more than myself. Little Mikey Myers, right? And that's what's funny. In Halloween, Mike Myers is a kid who kills his sister, spoiler alert, and then comes back and keeps on slaughtering. And it's funny how that he references the movie, gives a shout out to John Carpenter. And when I saw them on the tour on Clowns from Outer Space, they had the two Michael Myers costume guys with axes. So it's like this would become part of their theme and the liner notes are very interesting. Also, let's talk about how it took them a while to find their imagery, because on the cover they have like white eyes. They talk about wearing contacts. Jay says wearing contacts is like not fresh, but if you reference it, it's okay. The face paint, like look at them. It's basically just them with contacts. They weren't the ghoul-faced dudes who would be on the re-release. I mean,
no, that's right. And they went through a couple of different phases. Madrox has talked about in multiple interviews how, he used to, they tried like, black baby powder. They tried a bunch of different things, but didn't really, work. Like it would like clump up when they got sweaty performing and stuff. But yeah, eventually they landed. They even played with names like, Violent J says Behind the Paint. It took a while to land on, just plain Twiztid, and which is interesting because like Madrox actually uses the term a couple of times in his verses on this album. Did you notice that?
On the ISI songs, which from the demo, and by the way, this is the debut of the first time we'd hear Blaze on a record, who was part of ISI, who's on the chorus of what is it? What song? We'll get to it, but where he's shouting on the.
Yeah, so like the one that made it to both versions, What the F, and but Somebody's Dissin U, he's also on the chorus, which is just on the OG release. He
sings the chorus?
Yep. I think that's him singing. If you think somebody's, I'm almost positive that's Blaze.
That's what's up. And Myzery is the first time we hear Myzery on this. In the record, they give a liner notes. Jamie gives a shout out to ICP, Myzery, Jump Steady, Mikey Clark, and a dude named Minority. Was that Myzery's hype man? Maybe the Juggalos can leave a comment, because I don't know who Minority is, because he references him. Also, Myzery references Minority in his verse.
Word. Very possible. I don't know. That's a good question.
So we talked about the imagery. We talked about shocking imagery. We talked about death metal. So here's let's show a picture of Hieronymus from Mayhem, who Macaulay Culkin's brother played in the wonderful Lords of Chaos movie, which is based on the book. Now let's look at Twiztid's face with the grease paint and the black eyes. It's the same. It's a very similar thing, like taking the ghoul face, the white face with the black eyes, not being specifically like a clown or like Kiss, but kind of having this like weird gothic imagery of black metal. And that was their thing for a while. I mean, nowadays it's not. What do they wear now? It changes constantly, right?
Yeah, they do mess with their paint a lot. You know what I mean? And but it is, I think their standard paint is still like the white paint with the black eyes.
Okay, so that's like the main thing they go to.
Yeah. And contacts, you know what I mean? They're always playing with different contacts. Like the first time I've seen, I think contacts like those were probably Twiztid, and like they had some funky contacts. Like I remember like in the Green Book era, like they'd have the ones like with like the four little, like it was almost like a diamond at it. Like they had some intricate contacts, and I had never seen those back then. That kind of blew my mind.
For the Lars Attacks video, I had to wear these very painful white contacts, which was, of course, inspired by Twiztid and all that. But those hurt, dude. Yeah. I wear contacts to see, but you know what they say? To be successful in the music industry, it's all about having the right contacts. Hey!
That's right, man. It reminds me of Bubbles, you know what I mean, from Trailer Park Boys. He goes through a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I know he has like migraines and headaches from wearing those glasses, you know.
So
people suffer for their art.
There are multiple versions of this album. Kind of like there'd be multiple versions of Dark Lotus, multiple versions of Malenko. So I wanted to go on record saying my favorite Dark Lotus is the first one with Mars. Even though ABK kills it, I love the first version more with Mars. I like the second version of Malenko, and I like the second version of Most Tasteless more. Because I like pop hooks, I like rock stuff. People will tell me for years how much better the first Most Tasteless is, but you know, I got introduced to those songs on Psychopathics from Outer Space and like other compilations. I'm like, these are good, but I don't know, man. The second version of Most Tasteless is my jam, but this one is interesting for historical reasons, and we're going to get into some of the background. Brian, Snax, which do you like more? Which version? Let's go.
I do like the re-release more. I think the track list is significantly altered, but I do think slightly for the better. The OG release is super dope. You know, Murder, Murder, Murder is probably my favorite track that didn't make it to the re-release, but like Rock the Dead, you know, and it's just, that was probably my favorite song off Most Tasteless when I first heard it all those years ago. So I'd say the re-release. I would agree on all three of those you mentioned. Besides, I like I'm privy to the ABK tales from the Lotus Pod just because I'm such an ABK mark. I know that's like blasphemy in the Juggalo world because the Mars version is such a classic, and Mars is dope. That release is dope, but man, ABK rules.
You know, on Rock the Dead, he goes, what's the line? So many different thoughts rolling all in my head. What's that line from Rock the Dead?
Yeah.
A million. That line I paraphrased on 23, a song to my friend. I said a million different thoughts going all through his head about my friend Patrick. Like certain things from this record influenced me as a rapper that I'm realizing now, and we're gonna talk more about that like in as we go forward. So this album came out November 25th, 1997. That's almost 13 years ago from when this album will come out. So 13 years ago, almost to the day.
Well, 23 years ago.
23, jeez, Louise, time flies. 23.
I didn't think I'd ever be schooling MC Lars on math.
20. Yeah, in my head it's still 2010. Shoot. So okay, so this came out. So let's talk about where they recorded it and the demo hut and all that flavor.
Yeah, for sure. So, like we mentioned earlier, Twiztid, they weren't Twiztid at the time, approached ICP after things went south with House of Krazees, and they did have a demo with 3 songs that actually made it to both versions of Most Tasteless. Secondhand Smoke, Die Mother Effer Die, and How Does It Feel? And Violent J, he talks pretty negatively about that studio called the Disc. He refers to it colloquially as the demo hut because people could just go in there with like $250 and leave with a demo. But he was highly impressed with Twiztid's demo, and that's kind of what they got signed. They got signed off the strength of that demo.
So let's set the record straight. Maybe the Juggalos can help us. Scott Summer, like he's credited. He worked on Forgotten Freshness 4, Blaze's Clockwork Gray. But we couldn't figure out if it's Summer or Sumner. It was a very confusing thing, right?
It is, and I think it's a very different album credits. It's spelt differently, so I'm not sure either. And I like for a long time was wondering if it was Fritz the Cat, like that was his real name before he took on the moniker Fritz the Cat. But it's not because I think the story goes is that Fritz the Cat worked at the Disc. I think that's how Twiztid met Fritz the Cat, and of course, like Fritz is one of the greatest producers in psychopathic history.
Holler. Fritz actually engineered my interview with George. I got to FaceTime with Fritz. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're a great producer.
Dude, he is so good. Fritz, not to talk about my music, but Fritz is actually like an influence on me, man. Like nobody makes a bass line like Fritz the Cat, bro. Fritz the Cat, like synth bass is just like if he's playing a real bass, Fritz rules.
That's what's up. Let's talk about the track breakdown. So track 1 is just called Twiztid, right?
Yeah, yes, that's exactly right. The intro is called Twiztid, which is dope because normally intros are just called intro, but this one's called Twiztid. It's got some really I guess tranquil piano music, but it's juxtaposed with some like terrifying screams, and I think it's Violent J pitched down just yelling Twiztid over and over again, which is now kind of like a call like in the Juggalo world. Like people shout out Twiztid like that to this day.
That's true, actually. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah. then it goes into Secondhand Smoke. I wanted to go just make it clear. I remember when I moved. So I moved when I moved as a kid. In 5th grade, went to Newtown. My friend Dave would send me tapes, and one of them had En Vogue on it, the Free Your Mind, which Twiztid sample. But check it out. You look at the liner notes for this, they talk about other samples that were cleared. No reference of this sample being cleared, used by permission, is on anything. They just jacked En Vogue, even when it dropped on Island. And even though it's on Spotify, the Free Your Mind is from this old R&B song. And I'm just saying, like, they never cleared this sample. There's no evidence that they did, and I think that's freaking fresh.
It is fresh. I didn't know for the longest time that it was a sample from that En Vogue track. And then I remember, I don't know if it was the radio, there was a moment where I just heard that song randomly, like the original En Vogue song, and it blew my mind. I'm like, oh my god, that Twiztid sampled that.
We know that like Psychopathic has had its share of sample clearing lawsuits. This didn't happen, and the reason why En Vogue and R&B fans aren't checking for Twiztid, and Twiztid fans aren't checking for like mid-90s R&B songs. I mean, what's so fresh about that song is the guitar on the En Vogue Free Your Mind. It's a great song. It's an anti-prejudice song, and I love that song. And it's dope. I remember I was on a college tour. We went to look at different colleges in high school, and we were on the bus, and I was sitting with my friend Trevor, who was a DJ, and he'd gone to my old school, and he transferred to my school. And I remember I played him. I thought he'd like it because I knew people knew the En Vogue sample on my Discman. I'm like, listen to this. And 5 seconds, like, nope, don't like it, not feeling it. Because some people just don't, I don't know. Either you love Secondhand Smoke, or it's like, this is whack. And I freaking love this song.
It's one of my favorite beats like ever made, dude. Like the filtered bass line, like it's like when you listen to it, you're like, all these elements, I don't know why they thought to use them, you know what I mean, but they're so good. Like even that, like when the bass line goes like ding 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 ding, and then there's like almost like a synth like distorted kick drum, do you know what I mean? Like I think over one of the snares, like it's oh dude, that beat's amazing.
Beat is awesome. I would do, I've never gone on record saying this, I'd listen to the song over and over again and try to transcribe the lyrics. And since I was studying poetry, putting dots over where they had iambs and trochees and slant rhymes, and trying to like make a poet, because we were doing that with poetry in high school and doing analysis of it. I'd memorize it. When I was on the swim team, I'd be doing my laps, and I'd quiz myself on how much I could memorize this song specifically. And it's crazy how much this song was like my jam as a high schooler, and it's still my jam. And it's interesting how on the video cover they take out the N-word, and Twiztid used the N-word a lot on this record in the liner notes. Nowadays you couldn't get away with it. And it's something that they wouldn't do now. Live, they don't say it. But you were saying that Bizarre, you had a connection with Bizarre, right, Snax, and how like back in the day, white people would say this in East Detroit, like surprisingly, say this word.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a friend of mine, underground rapper Fury, a lot of people watching this are going to know who he is. Shout out Fury if you're watching. He's done management work for Bizarre and stuff, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but I remember him telling me that, like, he like, I think Bizarre, like, knew of Twiztid and stuff growing up, and, like, they're from an area where that was just common. Like, that's what they said, and I know, like, that's, in this day and age, like, that's hard to understand and, a lot more taboo than it would have been, but, I think they got a pass, it's just culturally kind of like a phenomenon that, it wasn't that big of a deal, and, like, even the Island re-release, like it makes it on there. So I just think that's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and ICP never used the word, but, and they shouldn't have used it. I mean, let's be fair. But, we're looking at it from a 2020 perspective. It's like, people might say, I don't know, like, we don't need to get into it. I just wanted to reference how my point is they don't use it live, and in the videos, the video of it, they take it out. I forever thought saying standing in some comfortable S like Chuck Norris, but no, dude, it's Chuck Morris. Do you know about this? Okay.
No, I figured it was like the karate gi, the comfortable karate gi.
No, I had to look this up. It's a reference to a local Metro Detroit commercial for the Chester's Boot Shop in Roseville, Michigan, which is where Hot Hits was, I think. And the commercials feature a Chuck Norris lookalike named Chuck Morris, who would have karate boots, and he'd talk about how comfortable they were. So that was such a Detroit thing. He goes, I'm standing in some comfortable. So it's really funny because it's not only is it a play on that, it's talking about a regional thing in Roseville near the Hot Hits record store where Alex worked. I think that's hilarious.
Dude, I think you just won Hatchet Chat with trivia, bro. That's so dope. I did not know that, and I bet you a lot of juggalos aren't going to know that either.
That's what's up. Now they do. Mother Blanker, which of course is an interpolation of the Ghetto Boys. This is like we talked about. Some of the themes are very loose on this. You noticed this, and I noticed this. We need to burn the White House gets reversed and backmasked on the Island re-release. So it's kind of shocking to hear it on the Psychopathic version. Like, oh, that's what he's saying.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And that was one of those things when I first heard the Island like re-release. It's just like, oh man, this is controversial. Like they actually reversed the lyrics. I didn't know what he said. I didn't have the ability to reverse it or anything. And another beat, like just so good. Samples Spooky Boogie by prog rock legends of all people, Gentle Giant, and just what a crazy find for a sample, man. I don't know of any other songs that sample it.
Did Mikey Clark didn't produce this one? Did he?
I think that's another Scott Sumner, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Also, Twiztid would later come out and try to put ICP on blast for the Supervillains song, right? The Slow Your Roll, which is the homophobic song, which we'll get to. And they talk about, ICP, they're gay juggalos who support them. That song's really offensive. But Jamie Madrox says everyone's an FAG or a lesbian and kind of like plays it down. So there is some homophobic stuff on this record. I'm just saying, like, you got, and also the re-release on Island, they do this joke going, tour with Marilyn Manson, do the Warp Tour. They're like, nah, bury me alive, underground. 20 years later, they do the Warp Tour. I'm just saying they're inconsistencies. It's all good. You got to make your money. I mean, the homophobia is not all good. That's like, that needs to go, and we need to call them out for that. And I'm sure Jamie would be like very apologetic about that. But it's shocking to hear that. And then, like the anger against, I don't know. That's whack. Exactly. And this album, Twiztid, they have pictures of weed in there. Jamie Madrox says a shout out to High Times for showing him all the weed he'll probably never smoke. By now, I'm sure he smoked like all the different strands. They have 2 smoke breaks, which is like, that's, Jay said, when I met Jay at the gathering, Megaran and I were talking to him, and we're like, Jay, are you going to write another book? And he's like, I want to, but ever since Blaze introduced me to weed, I don't remember much. And it's like, it's funny how ICP wasn't really smoking weed until the Cheech and Chong of underground horrorcore entered their lives. And, weed rap, I don't smoke weed, and it's all good if you do. But like, to me, that part of Twiztid's aesthetic gets old so fast, but I'm not judging. And like, if you Blaze, like smoke up, it's all good. But I'm like, all right, like that part of Twiztid is like, even when I was young, I was like, it just struck me as like, this is marketing, this is, I don't know, but that's become a huge part of their aesthetic now, and I'm like, it's like the Cottonmouth Kings element of it. Cottonmouth Kings have some great songs, but what's interesting to me about Cottonmouth Kings is not all the weed they smoke. I'm just saying, not as a straight edge kid, like that's just where I come from, and no disrespect to anyone, and it's all good. I just wanted to say I'm not feeling the smoke breaks.
100%. And I don't smoke weed either. I've only done it twice. It makes me feel like insane. And but it's funny because like those songs are just sonically so dope. Like I can never relate to the lyrics, but like So High off of, I think it's Man's Myth. Again, I think that's Fritz the Cat doing an amazing bass line. I think it's an original bass line for the song. So dope. And funny enough, with the Smoke Breaks tracks interludes on this album, like there's a juxtaposition because it's some very unique samples that the album starts off with, but these interludes have probably the most common sample in all of hip-hop, Zapp's More Bounce to the Ounce.
So Murder Murder Murder, which I first heard on Psychopathics from Space, this song, we talk about metaphor and simile, right? ICP, a lot of their murder songs are like, okay, well, we're getting back at this racist person. We're doing this and that. This song is very much graphic story where they're not clowns. They're talking about how one might actually do a home invasion, how they might cover up the evidence. And later on Monoxide solo record, his song That's Real talks about his rage at his partner for taking his daughter away from him. And so he tells the story of killing this woman who wouldn't let him see his daughter. And it reminds me of Eminem's song Kim and a lot of that stuff. Like, it's graphic, dude. And when you learn about his conflict with his family, it strikes you as, oh, geez, Louise. And also Jamie talking about self-gratifying on the sheets and then washing his hands. It reminds me of like in Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, after they kill everyone, Lady Macbeth can't, out damn spot. She can't get the blood off her hands because she can't escape the karmic retribution that comes from having a husband who did all this murder to become the king of Scotland. He's washing his hands, and it's like, yo, it's chilling, man. And it's also, what's interesting is you notice the Snax. They take a song by Cemetery Slaves, which is a sample of Method Man doing the murder. Cemetery Slaves is an underground group, and they took this beat. It almost feels like they jacked something underground to make it their own. I don't know. It's like if I were to sample a Mega Ran beat and then make it, you know what I'm saying? Mega Ran's not a good example because he's pretty established. An underground nerdcore rapper, and like, this is my song. Yeah, if I sampled you, I don't know. I mean, it's all, maybe they got Cemetery Slaves permission, but like to take an underground rap song, I don't know.
I've wondered that too, dude. And like, I just learned that when doing research for this, you know, and we can link to the song in the description because it blew my mind.
Who knows? I mean, the Cemetery Slave song is okay, but the Murderer is it's raw, man. It's
so good, man. And I think it was actually going to be on the new House of Krazees album. You know, there's a couple of songs like that, you know, that we'll talk about, but like they're referencing like their House of Krazees names, you know, Monoxide being Hectic and Madrox being Mr. Bones. I think this is one of those that wasn't originally a Twiztid song.
That's interesting. First Day Out, of course, covers ICP song from Carnival of Carnage. I thought when I saw them in 2017, it was ironic that they were very anti-ICP and then freaking playing their covers of ICP. It reminds me, so we talked about, I'm going to do this quick because this episode's already pretty long. We talked about how Twiztid reflect the end of the age of empire. Andrew Marvell wrote a classic poem in 1681 called To His Coy Mistress. And this was this example of metaphysical poetry where with the influence of finding the New World, colonizing America, all these new cultures coming together, England's place in the world stage was slowly starting to change. Therefore, poetic references were becoming more weird and surreal. So this is a song basically saying, yo, let's go, girl. Time is short. I know we're not married, but I want to show you how I love you. And he has some interesting lines in this poem, which is a prime example of metaphysical poetry. He says, thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song. Then worms shall try that long preserved virginity. That's foul, dude. That's some horrorcore. And then he said, this is a great couplet. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. Andrew Marvell is like, basically when they do that line with the piano breakdown and he's trying to explain to her why he wants to be physically affectionate with her, I thought about Andrew Marvell hollering at this girl in a metaphysical late 17th century British voice. And I instantly thought, man, why does Twiztid and ICP have to clown on the fall of the British Empire? Why? Just because Joseph Bruce's name is Scottish and Scotland had a fight against England, just because Joey Utsler's name sounds kind of like Ulster, Northern Ireland, which reflects the battle of trying to find Irish independence. Why do they have to denigrate the fall of the British Empire by referencing Andrew Marvell's metaphysical examples in To His Coy Mistress? And then I thought, you know, $85 an hour and you want to play? Let's keep it moving.
100%. It's truly, you know, I think that was most critics' problem with this album when it first came out. It was too derivative of Andrew Marvell. You know what I mean? That's why a lot of people can't get behind it to this day.
Andrew Marvell, original Juggalo. First Day Out, and it's funny how Jamie Madrox playing the pimp, and then Jay goes, oh! He does the background line. It's funny how Jay it's rare when a band is on a cover of its song. The only time I've seen this is when Weird Al Yankovic parodied Dire Straits' Money for Nothing, when he did the song for UHF, Money for Nothing, Beverly Hillbillies. The guitarist from Dire Straits was like, you can do my cover if I can play the guitar solo, and he did.
That's dope. That's super cool. Yeah, it definitely is cool. And just, you know, a reminder of like back then, you know, ICP and Twiztid kind of felt like one band in a way, you know?
Yeah, and like that's why Dark Lotus was so ill. Yeah. Somebody's Dissin U. You were saying it's probably an ISI song. Yeah. Monoxide calls himself Hectic. Blaze is on the hook, like you said. Yeah.
It is a super dope song. It's made it to like, you know, several collections, one of the Cryptic collections. Psychopathic from Outer Space, and you know, it is a definite classic deep cut of Twiztid's.
Cannonball Adderley Quintet's Capricorn, which is a classic old jazz song. It's tight. Meet Cleaver. We got another theme song. Basically, it's just about the Psychopathic Hatchet and Hatchet Chat. Whoop whoop. Mikey Clark produced it. It's the first debut of Myzery. I think it's cool that they talk about the Voltron reference, which is like a kind of fun pop culture nerdy reference. Monoxide says, "You're phony as the fifth Beatle, right?"
Yeah.
And through a lot of Twiztid, there's a lot of references to Run DMC because Run DMC have a line, there's three of us, but we're not the Beatles. And they got a lot of flack for that because it came out right after John Lennon was shot. So I always thought, like, you're corny as the fifth Beatle. It reminded me of a reference to Run DMC. Also, the chorus of Headache from Dark Lotus, I cut the head off the devil and I throw it at you, is from Run DMC's Raising Hell. So I was here. I got into Twiztid before Run DMC, and that line made me think of that Run DMC song. Myzery's Par la Isla, he says that on the hook, and that became his record. It's like he's promoting his album, which I guess we'll do that record. Par la Isla will do soon.
Yes, sir. It's coming up very soon.
Also, before ICP's verse, there's this guitar loop, which became the intro for F the World. If you listen to it, it's the same effects. So that's kind of cool how this song was stylistically influential. The Sam Kinison line is funny, and that's an example of what I'm talking about, metaphors and similes. He says, we're twisted like Kinison's back after the car wreck. Sam Kinison is a comedian who was going to do a show with his two girlfriends. They got in a car wreck and he died driving to do the concert. And that had happened somewhat before this. So like Sam Kinison, that's a simile where Twiztid are more about metaphor. So I thought that was a good example. Myzery talks about rocking Scullies and army jackets, which was like a late 90s Puerto Rican New York style, but we'll get into that later. Let's talk about How Does It Feel?
For sure. Absolute banger. You know, it's probably my favorite. It might be my favorite song on Mostasteless now. Another example of just the production being so freaking good. You know, notorious because Madrock's last verse gets cut short. Juggalo's always wanted a sequel to that song and wanted it to be finished, and eventually it was finished on Twiztid's recent release, The Continuous Evolution of Life's Questions or Question Marks, on the song That's Why They Hate Us More Than You'll Ever Know. It's like a remake of the beat and everything, which I loved because, dude, that beat, I just don't know what sonically, those three beats, and even What the F, just are they're on another level, dude. Like, I can't say enough about them.
Well, so wait, is that the thing where like the tape all of a sudden, like it's like a record scratch or the tape stops? Yeah. And it sounds like there's live drums on this. It's the first song I've ever heard on a Psychopathic release that has like a live drummer.
Word. Yeah, it does have. Yeah, the drums are banging.
Live on Warped Tour, seeing them with the drummer. Freaking kill this song. She Ain't Afraid. So check it out. So in 1976, Stevie Wonder put out a record called Songs in the Key of Life. There's a song on this record called Pastime Paradise, which 2 years before this, Coolio would have sampled for Gangsta's Paradise, and then Weird Al did Amish Paradise. She Ain't Afraid is based on a sample of a Stevie Wonder song from this record called I Have a Talk with God, which is a really beautiful, funny, sweet, emotional Stevie Wonder song that they turned into this like foul sex song. I feel like Monoxide really goes in on his verse, but I'm just saying that like, it's funny how rap was sampling the same Stevie Wonder record within a few years of each other. They probably were like, yo, Gangsta's Paradise. Oh, we could do that, but let's make it, I don't know. It's interesting, right? That the Stevie Wonder sample happens so close to the more famous one, which is Gangsta's Paradise.
That is interesting, actually. You know what I mean? I always just find that's what's so cool about hip hop, because you just see different artists' takes on these samples that they're digging up.
Shaggy explains that he is an equal opportunity with women, and he says some offensive things, which nowadays didn't age that well. When I heard it, I was like, "What the F?" Track 11.
So the original release of Mostasteless actually opens up this song with a sample of Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which is super cool. Just like a full, pretty significant chunk of dialogue was taken out, probably because of would have cost a lot of money to clear it, and then it just kicks into the song, which is one of my favorite songs on the album, because again, just the production is something else.
And they increased the deceased is a line that's used a few times. It's used on Secondhand Smoke. And you speculated maybe that was the going to be the title of the ISI record. Or the Twiztid record.
I always thought that was interesting because it's on, it's pretty much said right away on Secondhand Smoke, and it's said again on this album. So I just had that thought.
And the sample is Brother to Brothers, I'm Gonna Take Your Love. It's tight.
That's right.
We get another smoke break. And then we have $85 an hour, which to me was my introduction to Twiztid. I heard this on Forgotten Freshness 1 and 2. It's funny how on Malenko, Violent J says, "Don't forget me like you did with Rob Bass," and then they sample "It Takes Two" on this, which is funny. We talked about that on the Malenko episode.
Exactly, and just super dope, super funny song. I always wondered if it was like a legitimate freestyle because it's definitely written to sound like they're freestyling. But I know that like ICP has said that they're not good at freestyling. But super good song, and I know you appreciate the prank call flavor in between the verses.
Yeah, which is a throwback to the Jerky Boys and the Mutilation Mix stuff. Shaggy's verse, I love Shaggy, but I like his cadence is like, I stretch your nuts back. I was like, really? I don't know if you're freestyling, Joey.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's hard to say, you know what I mean? I think Jay kind of like, Jay sounds more like a freestyle more than Shaggy's. But either way, just it's super funny to hear them on a beat like that because that's not something you hear all the time.
And when the beat drops, Jay brags about working on Belle Isle and picking up deer defecation. Let's talk about another example of the death of empire. What is Belle Isle? This island was settled by the French colonists in the 18th century, originally referred to as Hog Island, where livestock could range free on the island. Then, in the late 1880s, Frederick Law Olmsted, who later built and designed Central Park in New York and Stanford University, where I went to college, he wanted to create a park on Belle Isle. It wasn't finished because of budgetary concerns following the wars of the late 19th century. So fallow deer were brought to Belle Isle to Britain during the Roman Empire, and as the Roman Empire collapsed, England was only one of the places where you could find these animals. Later, they were brought to Michigan and Belle Isle as one of the only places where this species of deer could be found as they became extinct in Britain following the collapse of the Roman Empire. So from the 1890s, population of the fallow deer on Belle Isle fell because of cyclic inbreeding. These deers are all, sleeping with each other. They weren't able to leave this island. And in 2004, the last 300 of them were kept at the Detroit Zoo, and some of them were on Belle Isle. But because of the issues with the Iraq War and America's involvement in the Middle East, there was a decrease in the budget and budgetary concerns. So the park for the deer on Belle Isle was not able to be maintained. So if we look at Jay's line about cleaning up deer crap on Belle Isle, this theme of the French colonialism of America, Romans colonizing England, which is another example of an island, the Central Park in New York, and the Dutch colonizing New York, and then finally the closing of the Michigan economy because of the Iraq War. It connects to this element of the death of empire just in one of Jay's lines, because I was like, why would you be picking up deer crap on Belle Isle? It's because this animal from England and Rome is very celebrated and kept on this one part of Michigan, which is a part of the island which ironically is north of Canada, even though Canada is north of America. It's an island off of the coast of Detroit. Now you know about that line. We went in tight.
Dude, for all the juggalos wondering, I started wearing bandanas to help keep my wig, from being flipped from all this, knowledge that Lars drops.
That's crazy though about Belle Isle, right? Like I'm like, now I know. Now y'all know about Belle Isle's convoluted connection to empire and how it acts as a metaphor, a metonymy, as you will, for what the aesthetic of this Twiztid album represents. Let's talk about Renditions of Reality, G, and then we'll talk about the aftermath, then we'll get out of here.
For sure. Man, what a song. Once again, I know I keep talking about the production, but that's what I think of when I think of a lot of these songs. It's what comes to mind because this beat is so good. Cryptic Collection. I think it's volume 1 actually says in the liner notes. There's an alternate mix on one of the Cryptic Collections. And it says in the liner notes that, Jamie or Madrox and Monoxide had that made just to like vibe out to. And I could definitely see it because it's so good, very like ambient, atmospheric. It kind of reminds me of like a DJ Shadow beat or maybe a DJ Crush beat. The verses are deep and introspective too. It's just a masterpiece of a song in my opinion. And one of the most interesting things about this song that I just found out researching this show, Monoxide actually uses his verse from a HOK release. Head Trauma was the album, and the song was Slip Into Reality, which is a similar title, a similar concept. Madrox has a new verse for this song, but Monoxide just uses the full verse again for the song.
As Twiztid's later work would show more about their story, Monoxide's problem and that on That's Real, talking about not having custody over his daughter. Jamie's song, Tearjerker from Fatso, is so real, dude. And he talks about his dad dying And it's honestly, it's emotional. He's like living at home. His dad's sick. They're in the same house. He's seeing him less and less and less. And on the last night, he asks his dad if he's okay. He says, "Yeah, Jamie, I'm fine." And then he dies that night. And how weird it was going to school and everyone knowing. Dude, it's a damn shame Daddy died 11 years today. It's Monoxide at his most. When Twiztid take away the makeup, the shock, the grease paint, the horror stuff, all this stuff we're talking about, the death of Empire and how that informs the aesthetic. When they become who they are, Jamie and Paul, they're at their best. And it's like they're leaving Psychopathic in a way is them trying to regain that. But all this stuff and the marketing and the characters and the ISI is what they needed to do to get to this moment. And it releases the album in a real level where you're like, I kind of want to know more about these fools. Interesting, man. Well, it's interesting how then Jay would be a paternal mentor, almost like a father figure to them. And
absolutely. Why? As he was to many juggalos.
No, I was just saying, like, a lot of these juggalos, like, the father figure was absent. A lot of hip-hop culture, like, so what happens? You form a brotherhood, you form a new form of family, and, like, yeah, and that's why this whole thing is more. There's more beyond the scenes than we know. That's why we can't speculate. And like, I feel like one of the themes of Hatchet Chat is bringing education, knowledge, juggalo unity in a way where we're kind of like, we laugh about stuff and we will put all the facts on the table. And they say in the liner notes, "Thank you, ICP. We can never repay you enough. We'll always be grateful." And I feel like in a way they probably are, but I could see how Jay and Shaggy would be pissed that they gave a platform for these dudes, put them on, made sure they came and gave them every opportunity, and then they did all this stuff behind the scenes that we know about, which we'll touch on. But I think that this record, having said all that, this is a great record, and when we talk about the Island re-release, we can get more into that. There's a hidden track where they give away a phone number. You and I realized it was a phone number about a guy with giant balls going to watch wrestling. And I was like, what does figure it out mean? Oh, he gives numbers and it's the Twiztid hotline.
Absolutely. And like, I just love the story so much. I was dying laughing listening to it recently. And like, it's that juvenile humor that I love from ICP. It reminds me of like Stranglemania and stuff. And yeah, like it's not like on the terror wheel or other times ICP have done it where like they're telling you, they're giving you a phone number. Violent J is just telling a story, but he says these numbers and the numbers are emphasized. They kind of have like an echo effect. We discovered that it matches up with the Twiztid hotline number that's given in the liner notes.
Which is kind of funny. And that hotline people would call and they'd later have messages from it. I think it was on Cryptic Collection or Freak Show where they play the messages at the end that are like, that's a whole nother thing. We'll get into that. But that's so fortunate for Twiztid to have met up with ICP and for ICP have given him the chance. And Paul and Jamie talk about, Paul does these streams like, well, ISI would have happened without Twiztid, sure. But would you have had this huge audience and would like 23 years later, would we have been talking about your Psychopathic debut? No. And would also Psychopathic have grown without all the artists Twiztid brought to the label? So it was mutually beneficial. But we're not going to do... We're not going to talk about the Magic Ninja Twiztid releases, just the Psychopathic ones, because if we had to pick a side, it's more about talking about their history connection with ICP, not really focusing on like what they did after, which we understand and like it's worth mentioning, but we can't do whole episodes on the shows just on principle,
100%, dude. And we made a decision to keep it positive. We want to be a positive force in the Juggalo community. But for Hatchet Chat, I just want to say, as Violent J said, the music, the artists, they might let you down, but the music is always here for us. You know what I mean? And I think that's what this show is about.
This show is about this. And as we said, Most Tasteless is an album that reflected black metal, death metal, and underground music in a way that hadn't been represented in hip-hop, showing lyrical themes of the death of empire as the 21st century was showing a change in culture. Now hip-hop was becoming a defining voice for the youth. It shows the remnants of groups like House of Krazees and potential groups in a vestigial sense like International Superstars Incorporated. And it was the second artist that ICP had put on Psychopathic that wasn't them after Project Born, which was, interestingly, aesthetically the two twins, the babies, like the double-headed beasts, like like the Grim Reaper with the two kids on the cover of Project Born. That in a lot of ways was in a lot of Twiztid's imagery. Twiztid was signed with Island Records, and Island would only put out 2 of Twiztid's records, Most Tasteless and Freak Show, but those are the Most Tasteless and re-release, and Freak Show and Island are, I think, 2 of their best records ever. And Twiztid really shines when they have people helping them define their aesthetic and their comic branding for a way for them to be themselves and focus on their skills. You take that away, it becomes less interesting to me. But you need that for it to become this interesting dynamic. That's all I wanted to say. I'm MC Lars. This is Hatchet Chat.
I'm MC Snax, y'all. Whoop whoop.
We'll be back next week is next week Myzery or no? Next week's Shockumentary.
I believe so. Yep.
If we got anything wrong, leave a comment. We don't want to see any drama about who's wrong and who's right. That's so boring. Like we know that this is Hatchet Chat and y'all are probably going to be on ICP's side, which like is cool and like, you know, but we're not trying to, you know, we want to give Twiztid the benefit of the doubt because I think a lot of people have not, but I can see why they haven't in a lot of ways. So that's all right. See you next week. Bye everyone.
Peace, y'all.
Whoop, 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 whoop.